Okay, I've now tacked and removed my pins around the armhole, and I'm just about to actually sew the sleeve in. I've taken the arm off the end of the sewing machine and I'm starting at the underarm seam here. I'm just running 1.5 centimetre seam allowance around the armhole and making sure inside that your sleeve is out the way. Everything's flat and nothing's getting caught in the way. Famous last words. And just run a seam all the way around until you get back to the beginning again. I've now finished off this cuff with a piece of gold braiding just to set the edge off a bit nicer, and now my red stuffing is in. I've put some ivory pearls in places just to give it a nice texture and look. Now I'm going to start sewing my tapes on for my boning channels. Now really I should have left a bit more seam allowance in place like this because I didn't leave quite enough to overlock all of them, so some of them I've been able to do, some of them I haven't. So I'm just going to go ahead and whip stitch these channels down so that I can get my boning in place. Now coming to the end of sewing my boning tape on to insert my metal bones. I'm not going to explain in this video how to cut and put the ends on these because I've already done it in previous videos, and you can search it on YouTube search anyway, and there's loads of videos that will tell you how to put the end caps on, so I will be skipping that bit. But basically I've put my tapes on, and there are two ways you can sew your tape on. You can either do the basic just up and down stitch all the way along, just a running stitch, or this old-fashioned method which is much quicker and it works much better, and you just zigzag around, because then the bone can't move out either end very easily. But every now and then I've gone over it twice just for some extra strength. And then at the bottoms and tops you'll then go over it quite a few times again to seal it in. But first of all you'd have to pin your tape in place anyway with your bone inside, and then we just pop that in and push it up. Like so, so it's right inside and it's going right the way to the top. The next thing I've done is pin this facing in place, and I've just tacked it down onto my boning channels here just so it isn't so annoying, because at the moment it's quite loose and flapping all over the place. So I'll just run some little cap stitches there, and a few more on the shoulder seams as well, just so it holds it down then and it won't move so much out the way. We're now going to move on to the back openings. Now there's several hundred different ways you can make fastenings on anything: zips, velcro, hooks and eyes, bars, like we are going to do. So really, I mean, this shows even after 11 or 12 years of doing this, you can still forget to think several stages ahead. Really, the best thing we should have done is maybe cut this canvas down, because now we've got all this bulk in the corner. But there we go, we're going to muddle through anyway, but that's really what we should have done. We are aiming to just overlock the other side and then just place the hooks on there, and this side we're going to actually put a proper facing on, which I've cut here, which is just a long rectangle piece, so you know, as long as your back and only about that wide. So that's what we're going to try here. We're now going to start putting the facing on, and to start with we want to make this nice and neat. You can see I've overlocked it now. I mean, really it should be okay, but I just want it to be extra neat and turned in. So we've turned in the top edge there. And make sure you turn it in the opposite way, as you can see I've done here, because then it will go the inside like that eventually. We then go to make a start and pinning my facing all the way down here, the usual seam allowance, which is about 1.5 centimetres. It's at this point you can say if it's enough, or if you want your bodice a bit tighter, a bit looser. Obviously you can only go as far as wide as you've made your piece, so this is where a good fitting comes in earlier on in making of. Okay, we've now overlocked this other edge as I explained earlier, and we've left a really long tail, and Mum is just going to explain why.
Okay, we don't want, because this edge is going to be on show, might be on show, we don't want to cut the overlocking thread just there, because then you'll have wisps of little tiny threads. So I'm going to give myself a decent amount of thread, and I'm going to thread it into a needle that's got a bigger eye, like so. Then go into the back of your overstitching, go down a few of the stitches at the back. You don't have to go down too far. Then pull the whole thing through, and then you can cut that off. So now you won't have any wispy white bits at the top, and it's all neat at the back.
Okay, you can see here that I've turned my facing inwards and I've catch stitched it to the edge all the way down, and just turned in the bottom like we did the top. And these marks here where the line up marks for the hooks are going to go. And you'll do the same on the other side to make sure that they meet, so you might want to put it on the table flat. Okay, moving on here, we've now overlocked that edge and the facing has been pressed, and we've gone ahead and started putting some hooks and bars on. Now, to show how these are done, if you refer to my Disney live action Cinderella bodice tutorial, it will show you how we did the little loops here. And then they will just hook on like so. Now we find these a little bit easier than doing hooks and eyes, but it's completely up to you. I've now decided to put a nice gold trim on it, so I got this from the local fabric shop. And I've put that down the middle first, and then I've sewn it across the bottom, all on by hand. So this is not machine done. And I've done the same across the top here as well, all the way around to the other side. We're now starting to work on the collar for the Snow White, and just looking enough, hanging around, I had this Simplicity pattern, number 1026, and it's got a collar piece in here which I thought would be perfect for Snow White. So this is the pattern. I did need to alter it a bit. I've already done a mock-up, which is here. This is the practice run that I did. Had to alter it a bit because it was a bit long. I didn't need it quite that long on me, because I'm a very short person as well. But this is generally what it's going to end up looking like. So we've done our practice, and I'm going to cut out my pieces. I'm using this fabric. Now, I got this from my local fabric store. I've no idea what it is. It just looked pretty, so I thought I would get it. It's got a strange weave. It kind of sparkles on the other side. It's got like a glitter effect on one side, and the other side it's a bit more matte, and there's just bits of glitter in the embroidery. So I don't know yet which side to use, so I'll decide once I've cut the pieces. You'll notice that this fabric has a pattern. So what we had to do is try and line up our original paper pattern piece with where I wanted it finished, and I decided that I wanted the finished thing to start about there, because obviously you've got your seam allowance to take into account of. Otherwise, if you cut it there, you're going to end up with your pattern starting further down. So obviously it's a bit hard to do for the rest of the pattern, but I thought for the top one we'll do our best. So you had to really match this up well and make sure that either side was the same, and taking a tape measure, do some measuring as well to make sure it was finishing at more or less the same places. Now this is where you find out that if it's a cheap second piece of fabric from a second shop, that the print is actually not printed straight, but luckily this is printed in a straight line, so it's a good piece, thank God. Otherwise it makes it a little bit more awkward, but there we go. We've overlocked the edges on the piece, and I've just got to cut out the second half because obviously we need a front and a back. Okay, I've now cut out my outer pieces here of my decorative fabric, and I have here, I'm just trialing this, I hope it'll work out, but it's a piece of corset couture. In the mock-up I used canvas, and I think it made it a little bit heavier, but I mean it was still fine because you got your boning, but I just thought I would try this. So first of all I've got to make some boning channels, so just fold it in half, make sure it all lines up, and then mark it with a pin halfway. It creases a bit too well anyway, so you've got a line there, so that should be the dead centre point of your collar. I've now created my boning channels, and I already got my measurements from before where to place them all, so I just transferred those measurements to here. But this is basically what it looks like. Just zoom out. And I'm using this synthetic whalebone that I used on my Georgian stays. It's quite strong and it's a little bit flexible and it's lightweight, so I'm going to give it a go on this. And I've cut it to the length I need. You can sand the ends down on this, or you can do what I'm doing and I'm just putting some tape across the top, because at the moment it's quite sharp when you cut it, so just remember to do one of those two things before you insert it into the casing like so. Okay, I forgot to say earlier, make sure that you sew across the bottoms as well across the top of your channels, and to make sure that your boning stays in. I've now inserted the boning, and I want to end up, remember this has got two sides, this fabric. I've decided on the whiter one as opposed to the glitter one, to be on both sides of the outside, if that makes sense. So what you have to do is put both good sides together, the sides that you want to show on the outside, put them both together like that. Just show you better here. So you've got good side to good side of your main fabric, and then you've got your stiffer fabric with the bone channels on the outside here. I've just pinned and I'm tacking it in place so it stays. It might not match it perfectly on the ends, you might have a little bit left over, don't worry about that at this point. But next you will be sewing your seam. Right, so now I've sewn all my layers together. I want to insert a ring of boning across the top, and I found this lying about the house. It's a very narrow, lightweight plastic tubing, probably only 2 to 3 millimeters wide. So, and handy enough, it was just enough to fit into the collar. Now I've decided to sew a little channel all the way around using the seam allowance to poke the boning into afterwards. or you can at this point turn it inside out the right way out and then run a row of stitching across the top after you've ironed it and put a tube in that way, but then you will have a row of stitching showing on the outside. But it's completely up to you which way you use, but this is the way I'm going to do it for this one. If you do any of that though, you'll want to cut back your stiffener fabric to just a few millimeters over the line. This just helps eliminate the bulk when you turn it the right way out. Okay, I've now sewn my channel on the inside here. When I've got to the other end, I've sewn across there quite a few times so that the boning won't come out. Don't sew too far in because a centimetre and a half is your seam allowance all the way around for sewing your band on, which will come in the next stage. So in the channel, and I'm just threading in that piece of plastic boning. All I can say is just be very careful and do it a bit at a time. You can see already that it's starting to take shape. So I'm just going to thread it right round to the side where I've put those stitches, and it should stop it coming out. And then I'll be able to seal it shut this end as well by putting some more stitches across here. I'm now making out the band to go around the collar. I already know that the length was too long because I trialled it on my other one, and my neckline is not that long because I'm only having it come a quarter way up from the bottom edge of the neckline. And I'm making this about 3 inches wide. I've just done some marks there. Because we're going to do it a different way to how the instructions said, which didn't work out for us. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut that out. You will notice on the pattern piece it's got a mark for the grain line up here. Just on this white cotton here, I already know that that is the straight grain because that is the very edge of the fabric. So you're cutting out a bias strip. This will help it go around the corners better, so do not put it on the straight grain and put your strip across that way. Before we put the band on, we just want to make sure that all these layers are meeting together as well as possible. So we just put some pins there just to hold it. Now take your rectangle band, fold it in half and get your halfway point. Like so. So that should be the dead centre of your strip. Then next we want to match it up with the centre of this, in which the bone casings I did should help because that was bang on centre from my measurements earlier. I've now sewn the seam on the inside of the band here, and then this is what it will look like on the other side. You just neatened up the inside here and tidied up all the edges and cut the excess off, and now we need to cut some of this off. So I've just measured a centimetre or two out from here. I've just gone over 1.5 centimetres because you'll need to turn it in, so then we can cut the extra off here, which I've done this side. Just getting my sister mum here to show you how to do the end. So you're turning it in, and then you need to turn the inside a quarter, and then fold it up towards that edge and repin. So then you just carry on turning a quarter of the edge and meeting it up to the edge there. Oh, sorry, we have to go from the centre. And meet it so it just covers your sewing line. Okay, and then we've done our half, now we're doing the quarter on the other side. And pin it down. Don't try going from one end to the other like I did on my mock-up. It does not work, people. Next you have to catch stitch your edges. Next you want to do the usual catch stitching of your edges down, just little tiny stitches. We do it on waistbands, and we did it on the cuff of Snow White's bodice just earlier on in the previous video at the end. And then that will finish that up. Next we'll talk about gravity. Now in cartoon land it stays up all by its magical self, but unfortunately in the real world it needs pinning on, or as we got here we've done some little poppers. Now you will need to put your costume on and have your helpful assistant actually line up where your poppers are going to go. So helpful assistant Mum actually put some marks on for me earlier on, and I've gone right ahead and I've sewn these to the inside because that's where the collar will be placed. And just try and show you here, it will actually bend it over like that. So I will just get my helpful assistant. Okay, so we're just demonstrating here from the front. The loop thing I put on is just to hang it up, so just ignore that. And then that will pop on like so. So that's when it actually goes on, it will look like that. So then it will look like the collar is actually part of the bodice. So that now finishes the bodice and the collar. Next tutorial is the cape.